Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good night, good evening for everyone. Welcome to our webinar, the Xilio webinar, where we're going to talk about how you go from chaos to control on your file shares specifically. We don't have a big audience. It's because this is a webinar that we're going to hold for the people in the US and Canada, and we made a mistake with the time, so it's quite early for them. Nevertheless, we're gonna have fun the coming hour. We have a lot to tell you, a lot to show you. I'm here together with my colleague Rob Aaldijk. So we're gonna start with some introductions. Rob, can you start introducing yourself?
Sure, thanks, Sjoerd. So I'm Rob. I'm working with Xilio for over 4 years now. I have a total of 30 years of experience in the field of information management. Last 4 years, I specialized in Microsoft and its information management technologies, including compliance. So happy to tell you a bit more about that today.
Great, thanks, Rob. And myself, I'm heading sales and marketing with Xilio, but mostly I've been in enterprise content management and information management for about 20 years now, different roles within consulting companies, and 10 years now with Xilio. So let's start with a slide on housekeeping. It's going to be recorded, or it's already recording. The recording and slides will be shared afterwards through email. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to also ask them during the webinar. You can use the chat for that. And after the webinar, we'll also include a very short survey to see if there's anything we could improve or anything that you would like to share still with us. Then the agenda for today. So I wanted to introduce where we come from basically, and why we think this is a good topic. And then I'm going to talk about why file shares are outdated. Maybe it's an open door, but I do want to have some time about that. The migration process, of course, we're a migration company first. That's what we do. That's what we're good at. And how do you go about that when it's concerning file shares? Then Rob will take over. Once you move your file shares, you want to also do that in a compliant way and set the right policies and labels and govern that with Purview. So he will talk about that. There's also a couple of case studies that he will share. We've done these projects many times, and there's a couple of case studies that he will share some results, tips, tricks about. And if we have time still, and if the questions weren't all asked during the webinar, we'll have some time to still do some discussion. Last webinar we did in Dutch at the same time, hence the timing of this one. And we had a lot of great discussions. So don't hesitate to put any questions right away in the chat, and we'll pick them up. So as an introduction, I wanted to stand still, or I wanted to show you the mission of Xilio. So our mission has been always to allow our customers to unlock the full potential of their enterprise content. We want to transform it into valuable digital assets to make sure that they drive significant business outcomes, or to make your organization smarter. And what's always a big concern, if you want to stick to that mission, is file shares, because they are almost everything the opposite, and they don't allow you to extract the most value. They're blocking that basically. So one of our main goals, maybe, and you could call it even a sub mission for quite some time, is to get rid of all the file shares for our customers. No more file shares. And we want to move them all into a more modern digital workplace, such as Microsoft 365, so that you can leverage the full value of that content that you have moved. But it's not that easy, right? You can't. The file shares are unstructured. It's been there for quite some time because that's how we started. So you don't want to lift and shift, because if you take garbage out and then you put garbage in, then what the users will get is garbage again. So you should be making sure that you do it in a smart and enriching way, and we're going to talk about that. Another important aspect, and that's more Rob's part of this webinar, is that you do it in a compliant way. Because you don't know what kind of content it is. It could be very much valuable or archive-worthy content. That's what we see a lot with our government customers. So you need to be sure that it is in a compliant way. The whole migration, and afterwards it's governed the right way. So that's what we're going to talk about. And if you have any questions about that right away, please, again, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. Then file shares, why are they outdated? I think probably everyone can call this out, but it's the limitations of it, right? And also the changes that we have had with remote working, limited access and collaboration. You used to be all in the office or more in the office, logging into your network share. Aside all the other aspects that are not optimal with regards to file shares, at least you would have access. But now this is also more difficult, setting up a VPN and making sure you get access to that local drive, etc. So it's just not ideal for that. Then secondly, there's no version control. Of course, the enterprise content management were set up initially, and this is one of their main features actually when we started implementing these systems, that you would have automated version control, or at least you would be able to store versions within the same registration of a document, etc. And then metadata, describe the document in a good way, especially very much needed for classification, records management, and getting it within the right governance in your organization. So that's all not possible on file shares. Then there are security limitations, right? You can't set up the models potentially as you would like. It's missing completely compliancy tooling and records management, which especially for government organizations is of course by law necessary. Then relatively, they are running on premise, they are backup, etc. They are relatively high cost for the volume that they take up. There's one other one that recently became more popular in a way, or is more clear. It's really a limitation because it's not a good basis for good quality AI, and AI is where we're going. The use of AI within your day-to-day work and processes that you support within your organization, and if it doesn't have the right quality content, metadata, contextual information, it just doesn't work well. You get wrong answers, you get misinformation. It's a big risk, even more risk than if you just search, find a document, and you can make up from the document itself that maybe it's not the last version, or maybe it doesn't contain the right information. You don't get that easily when you just get an answer from an AI. So you need to make sure it's all the best quality possible. Then say you want to move from your files to Microsoft 365. How do you approach that? What's a good way to do that? Well, as I said, it's not a lift and shift. It's much more. And throughout the years, we defined and optimized our approach towards that, and it follows this process. First of all, of course, we'll need to extract the data of the file share to run proper analysis. So we'll extract, first of all, only the metadata, because it has limited metadata, but there is metadata like creation date, edit date, the owner of the document, the path it sits within the network. All these things you can extract and use in your analysis. So import it into our database, and then do analysis on the data together with our customers, or our partner runs it for it together with their customers, and they will analyze the data, build reports. It's a very iterative process. Go through the visualizations and the dashboards, select what kind of data is valuable for them, what kind of data has risks, what kind of data has potentially no value. It's that first step to drill down to data that you want to either not move, clean, or maybe you need to classify, because that's the fourth step after the cleaning, and we can do that on several data points. We want to classify the data to be sure that it sits within the right schema, has the right policies, etc. The classification became easier. We always used algorithms that are out there, and we're still going to do that because they are they still can be good enough and create even a smaller subset that you can then run through AI. We use local LLM. We tested with different ones, and the results are pretty amazing. You can create a specific look at it as a custom GPT for classifying documents against your how do you call it in English, your retention schema, or the plan that you need to implement for your, for instance, government organization. And if you have all that information and a couple of examples, it's just amazing the result that you can get. So that's now the process that we also will follow. Then afterwards, you have classified everything, you've enriched even where possible. Can be done through business logic. You can create a process to get manual input. You can use AI maybe even to add some tags to the documents, and then it's time to move it to SharePoint. Of course, there's a lot of migration work there as well, like mapping it to different sites, mapping it to libraries, importing the versions of documents if this is what you identified on the file share, and we use Xilio Migrate for that. So it's a low-code platform. You see a screenshot there. It can be used by ourselves or by our partners. You basically create a transformation flow and run through that process to make sure all the cleaning is done, enrichment is done, and it's actually moved to the SharePoint environment. Then a last step to make sure it is labeled correctly, and Rob will also show more about that, is to set that label. That's also based on the classification or other smart things that you do with the data, but it's needed to pick it up with Purview within the correct governance and the correct compliance rules. You've done a lot of effort to determine logic and create rules, etc. And it makes sense to guard that the quality of your data, which is very important also for Copilot, for instance, if you're using that, make sure it stays correct and on par. And you can use content care for that. It's basically dashboards that run on your SharePoint environment. If there are any questions, please feel free to share. Otherwise, I'll continue with a compliant process. Also, it's something that's really in the core of our product. It's a flexible setup, and it allows us to report every step of the way. By default, we do it as described here. So we have different reports at a certain point in time in your migration flow, but it can be even more granular or more detailed. So reports that we do always are after extraction. This is what is extracted. This was what is in your source. Then after transformation, this is what we're going to apply. This is the logic that is going to be applied, and this is the result of it. So this is your subset of data that we're going to move. And then, of course, after import, you also get back the ones that were successful, and you have from beginning to end a track record of every document, what happened to it, and when, and by who, and where it now is. And that's what we call a migration audit trail, and that's always delivered upon the end of a migration. I see the titles here are in Dutch, but luckily the words are very similar. Then one additional slide I wanted to add compared to last week is we did some research and asked partners, customers, and our own research based on our experiences, what are now risks of user-led migrations and what are benefits of doing it more in a centralized approach? Because we see organizations trying to do it themselves, and they can still use Xilio for that, but then they do it per department, for instance. But there are risks then involved, and they are about data inconsistency, compliancy issues, delays and timelines, not having the time as a user to really do it, or not having the mandate, or trying to find the mandate. So if you set it all up centrally, it just has a lot of advantages. So this is something that we did some research on and created a small document on. So I just wanted to share so that you can have a read through if this is something that you're debating or thinking of. And with that, I wanted to hand it over to Rob. He's gonna tell you more about Purview. Thank you.
Thanks. Hope you can see my screen. Let's put it in presentation mode again. I took over the presentation. So happy to share some insights about how to apply compliance, information compliance with SharePoint, but in general with Microsoft 365 as it works across the different applications. And the way to do it is with a special product by Microsoft called Purview. And the reason they made it into a special product is so that it is able to work across all those applications that are hosted on the Microsoft 365 platform instead of having different functionality per application for the same. So Microsoft Purview consists of three big clusters of functionality, essentially. The one that interests us most typically is information protection and governance, which consists of functionality for data loss prevention, information protection, and today I will show a bit more about records management specifically. So data loss prevention focuses very much on the data lifecycle. I will explain in a minute. It has a relationship with records management, but it's not the same. The information protection is basically meant to avoid that people with malicious intent will attempt to access your content, your precious content, and steal it or compromise it or in whatever way misuse it. And the records management is more from a legal perspective. In some countries it's called archiving, but that's also not the same in at least Microsoft terminology, where you want to establish the preservation of information for the right amount of time and delete it at the right moment, as allowed by law or regulations. Insider risk management, I'm not going to dwell there a lot, but that's basically kind of your big brother functionality if you want to prevent information leaking through emails or chats, etc., or spot suspicious behavior by people that have access to your system, employees or temporary employees, etc., or guests. Then there's a lot of functionality that's able to monitor that proactively or in hindsight if a breach was encountered. There's more information security option than a compliance one. Discovery and response, that's more closely related to the information protection and governance. This gives you functions to audit information and audit certain events that happen to information. It allows you to deal with the various privacy acts, across the globe, including the European GDPR or even the Dutch variant of it, and the US ones and the UK ones, etc., etc. And finally, it gives the tools to your legal team for e-discovery in case of a legal litigation, so they can find and protect information that plays a role in a litigation case, for instance, for a period in time, at least for the period of the litigation, and then release it again for the normal retention management that we have defined in the records management. So there's a connection between all three, but today we'll speak more about the information protection side of things. If there's any questions about this, let me know. There's a lot to do about licenses for this product, etc., and how to implement it, and that would require several other webinars, but if you're interested, we can certainly organize it. There's also a course we published on the Udemy platform where you can learn about the information protection side of things and a bit about the discovery and response part. So if you're interested in that, let us know and we can share the link with you and you can check it out and see if that's something for you. We can even give a discount if you're really interested, want to take it or share it with colleagues. The difference between the information lifecycle and the information lifecycle support and the records management. So information lifecycle, you all know, I guess, is the process of creating, storing, retrieving, using, and in the end, archiving information, and after that, even delete it after some time. And there's a connection with the records management where you define the retention periods for each type of information, and you record that in a file plan. It has other names in different countries, but Microsoft calls it a file plan, where it's basically your retention plan, where you manage and define and manage your retention rules, and that allows you in the Microsoft platform to define automated retention, and also it supports the legal holds that are part of the e-discovery process for the legal department. In the end, it determines when information is securely deleted, and you can also audit periodically the processes and the file plan status, etc., so you can stay up to date. Now, what's the relationship with the information lifecycle? Whenever you decide to archive information that's for the longer term, then the retention plan determines how long the information will still be preserved, after which it will be deleted, or you decide to do something else with it, maybe move it to a different archive or a national archive or whatever. And this product gives you all the functionality to actually support all these steps. Specific products there or partial products. Microsoft Archiving is a new product that allows you at this point in time to archive complete sites in SharePoint. They're not to the point yet that they can support individual file archiving, but that's on the roadmap. We're actually, as a company, providing some inputs for that. So hopefully it will appear on the roadmap later this year or early next year. And we'll keep you posted on our website and in our LinkedIn posts. And the Purview functionality will take care of the data lifecycle management and the records management. And I will dive a bit more into that now. Hopefully all clear. So what does data lifecycle management and records management mean in Purview? Well, as they are supporting different processes, they also work a bit differently within Purview. So the data lifecycle management is expressed through general retention policies, as they are called, and they work at a different level from the other mechanism in records management, which I will explain shortly. So the retention policies you can define at what we call a container level. That could, in Microsoft 365, that could either be a mailbox, a site in SharePoint, or an individual OneDrive of a user. It typically has a larger reach in Microsoft 365 than the records management, because it also covers non-file content like Teams chats and Yammer, which is now called Engage, posts and information shared through those channels. It, however, does not have the more advanced disposition control you will get with the records management. In the end, if you define a policy, it will keep the information and prevent it from deletion for X amount of time. After that, it will just get deleted. Deletion policy in Microsoft, as you may know, Microsoft 365, is that of the recycle bin, which allows you to still retrieve that information within 90 days, after which it's going to be permanently deleted. The records management works by attaching so-called retention labels to individual files. So it becomes part of the metadata of the file. It gets connected to a label, and the label defines how long the file will be preserved, when it will be deleted, and what happens when it's getting deleted, and also what happens until that deletion. I'll explain in a sec. It does support certain item types because it's file-based, so it means you cannot label chats or posts in Yammer, etc., which is a limitation. But it does give you a very advanced disposition management as required by archivists or records managers across the world. So this is a really compliant way of applying retention policies within your organization. Quick differences here, as analyzed by our good colleagues from the UK Intelligy. It's a partner we work with sometimes in the UK when it concerns Purview matters and compliant migrations. So you can see to the left, the retention labels cover less than the retention policies in terms of types of content. What this does not express is that the retention labels have more options for more granular control over what happens to a file as against retention policies. No questions? I can't see the chat now, so maybe the colleagues can share if there's any questions if that happens. If not, all good.
Yeah, there's one question, Rob, I was just about to answer through chat, but we can do it also here.
Yeah.
How do we prevent SharePoint from becoming the dumping grounds our file shares are now?
That's a different topic. It's not so much compliance, that's more governance. And there have been complete courses, and maybe we should spend a webinar on SharePoint governance, but because there's a lot to say about it. It all starts with defining, well, basically getting the requirements clear first from your organization. And they could be very different across the different types of workforces that you have, the different functions and roles. But it starts with an information model that is fitting to the needs of the organization. And the information model will determine how much governance you can apply. That is apart from all the standard governance measures you can take actually as part of SharePoint implementation. We do happen to do SharePoint implementations. It's not our core business, but we work with very professional, well, sometimes individuals, Microsoft most valued professionals sometimes, to do that for us or with us or with the customer, but also our partner firms are able to do that. And we kind of have a good practice of how to implement SharePoint in a way that it prevents information chaos to be entering the organization again after you got rid of those nasty shared drives. So there's ways to do that, but it's certainly something you cannot neglect. And I would agree, if you do neglect it in an implementation project, there will be chaos. Without going into details, so that if you want to know more about that, we can certainly share some information about that, how we normally approach such an implementation project, or maybe an improvement project to set things right if you already adopted SharePoint and you see it grow and grow and grow without bounds and don't know where to start and cleaning it. Applying records management is one of the main things, the main governance measures, actually, because it prevents information from growing unlimitedly, because it actually deletes information in due time. So that's a good way to prevent archives from exploding. By cleaning up basically your content base on a very, very regular basis. But for that, you have to decide what needs to go, where, when, and how. So if you use records management, you need to define a label, which is part of a file plan. It's basically a set of retention rules in the end, and a label is kind of a retention rule, but it goes in two parts, and I will explain. So the label setting determines what's the functional scope of the retention. So basically, how long should it take, etc. So you define the retention and destruction periods, and also the record status. There's different ways. Compliant industries, for instance, need a very strict definition of a record. End users are not able to delete the record in the end. I should explain that in SharePoint, the record management is in place. That means that it works on a copy of the original content instead of protecting the original content. You can still, depending on this setting, decide if an end user can delete the original because they no longer need it from a business perspective, but still you keep the record in a secured place. And that's what I mean with in-place records management. It does not is not managed outside of SharePoint. It does not make a copy outside of SharePoint of the record. It keeps it in SharePoint, but it puts a special status on it, which determines if you can delete it or not for a certain period in time. You also need a trigger for the retention start, and there's a lot of ways to define it. You could define it on based on the creation date of a file, on the last change date of a file, but also on events. And in a lot of file plans, events are actually defined as a trigger for retention. So luckily or happily, Microsoft did take that into account, and you are able to define business events as a trigger for the start of a retention period on a file. Also, you can define the procedure for destruction. You can decide that it gets automatically deleted, that the file or set of files that's up for destruction need a review by certain individuals, which you can define yourself, groups of individuals, even staged processes are possible, or other actions, including starting a workflow that, for instance, copies the record to another location. But that does not determine where the label is applied. So still you need to define, okay, this label applies to this information, and there is a special policy mechanism that's called application policies, which determine the scope of the information for that particular label. You can define it in terms of units, like organizational units or user groups, containers like libraries, files, sites in SharePoint or OneDrives or email mailboxes. And also, at least for SharePoint and some other sources, a dynamic selection based on search queries, which is very powerful. And this is the mechanism I use most of the time when I implement a label application with our customer base. No more questions, Sjoerd?
No.
It's a very short explanation of what the product really is. So the course takes at least a few days to take in. It's a very, very elaborate product. And over the years, it has become actually applicable on an enterprise level, which is quite an achievement, because that needs a lot of special functions to be really compliant in all those countries that it's being applied in. So kudos to Microsoft for getting there. That also makes it a slightly more complex product. And I must say, for the typical records manager, a course is certainly needed from whatever provider. Microsoft doesn't really offer it because strangely enough, they're not subject matter experts in the records management area. From a technical perspective, yes, but from a functional perspective, no. So it's very good to orient yourself on a professional course in this matter before you apply the product, because you can also get it wrong. We're certainly able to help you with that, obviously, but make sure you get that knowledge as well. Some practical cases. We have applied the product Purview in a number of instances, and I want to pick out two because they can be compared and show you how the implementation differed a bit from case to case. So the first one, and I'll give you some tips on what were the success factors. Well, what I just said as well on governance goes for compliance as well. The information model, which is how you structure your content and how you make it findable, etc., determines also what you need for compliance configuration, but even also what is actually possible on how far you can automate it. And I cannot recommend a manual application of, for instance, record labels, unless you have only 10 documents per week, then you can do that. But most of our customers have more like 10,000 of documents per week. And then it becomes quite difficult to still do that manually or leave it to the end user. That's why automation is the logical answer to that, but it requires quite a good information model for it to work properly. Which means you have to think about the structure of your content and how you can consistently apply that to sites, to libraries, to folders, make proper use of metadata. In a lot of migrations, we see an absence of metadata, and think about, for instance, in this case, the migration of shared drive content. It doesn't have any metadata aside of folder names and file names. So if you didn't apply folder names and file names consistently, basically you don't know really what that content is all about. And that means we need to help you probably with classifying it first, For instance, use our analytical tools to determine how old that content is and how frequently it has been used. If it's not been used for 5 years, we can safely argue that it can be archived at least. If it can also be deleted, that's a question of does it fall into one of the retention categories or not. And that's something else we can determine basically by helping you classify the content against certain schemas, or even use, like Sjoerd said, automated classification tools, even using AI to try to sort of artificially fill in that role of an information manager or a data owner and try to classify the information automatically into certain categories. Then you also have to take care for, well, we often talk about files if we talk records management, but don't forget about the emails that have been part of a lot of legal litigations in the past. So it's really, they are records for sure. And in different countries, there are different rules on what to preserve in terms of emails and what not. In Dutch, in the Netherlands, we use the capstone method, which basically focuses on people with important roles in the organization, but there's various other frameworks that can be applied or should be applied. And also think about the chat in Teams. I'm currently implementing Teams for the Dutch Ministry of Justice, and there you see that because the content of the chats is sometimes very confidential, that you have to take special care on archiving and preserving those chats even. So the first case I want to discuss was for a Dutch government agency. Actually, we're currently closing the program, which was a 2-year program, very complex migration of 8 different systems into 2 new ones, a case management system. I hope you're familiar with the term case management. If not, let me know. But connected to SharePoint in this case, where the case dossier information is stored with a connection to the actual case, which records the process of the case handling and also does the reporting, etc. In their case, they decided that for the information model in SharePoint, one complete site represents one case. And each site has multiple libraries with complex folder structures, which are quite uniform, which is a good thing. But it means that if you want to archive a full site, a full dossier, and also preserve it according to the rules that are in effect for this particular government agency, you need to classify the sites, and that's a bit of a tricky mechanism. So there's a thing called site metadata, but it's not very visible. You know, maybe in SharePoint, it's quite easy on a file to define and change the metadata, but at a library or site level, it's something different. So that was a challenge here. Still, we managed to do that, and we use Purview basically to determine the retention rules and the application rules based on those site metadata. What made it complex was that if you define the rules, you have to determine the trigger, like I said, and in this case, the trigger for the starting of the retention of a case, which is then a site, a complete site, and all the content in that site is the closure of the case, which then had to become a site attribute. So it's a date on the site, which is called case termination date. And once that date is filled, the trigger will trigger, and the retention label will be applied to all the content in the site, which requires an application rule that does that actually. This was a trick to do it. We tested that and it works like a dream. So in this case, we could say it's fully automated. In case 2, this is a New York-based, we call it a reinsurance company. They reinsure existing policies from other insurance companies. And that's their business. So it's very much risk-based. So their primary business system is not so much a case management system, it's a risk assessment system, an administrative system which tries to collect all the data so they can assess the risk and then create a contract, a policy for that particular insurance. What happens there is that over time, and they had an existing content management system, Alfresco, where all the content was stored. If we analyzed the old system for them using our analysis software, and we found there's basically 2 types of sites. You have the risk-based sites, and you have all other sites, which are typically departmental sites and some special sites from HR, for instance. But there were legal, financial, HR, administrative sites that basically had very different retention periods for the content they managed. So we first automated the retention of the risk management sites, which are really uniform. So you could compare that to the first case where basically you take some metadata, you base a rule on it, and it will be applied as soon as, well, in this case, the last change is recorded on a certain piece of information. For all the other sites, we had to look at the different rules that apply to them. For HR, there were specific retention rules. For finance, there were specific retention rules. And we basically configured this per site. The problem is that none of these sites had a uniform information model. The only thing to rely on was basically the tagging of each file with keywords. And that was done manually. So the first instance of automating this was basically saying we create a rule whenever you find this tag, you apply this label. Still, that is then indirectly a manual process. So we are now proposing, now that technology has become available, to proof of concept with auto-classifying that content, so they do not longer in the future have to rely on manual classification. So in that way, we can still solve it. Very different cases, same available functionality, but very different uses of that functionality and very different configurations and solutions to the problem. Just indicating how complex the field can be, and it requires proper analysis to determine the right solution in the right case. The BAM project has finished in a sense, so we already can use it as a reference. Most of our projects can be used as a reference, unless it's very hush-hush. So this required the migration of 2 terabytes of content files from over 41,000 sites into SharePoint. So they have a lot of sites, as you can imagine, which also brings special challenges. And then implement records management on the result. We also had to do a lot of complex migration things like discard sites, rewrite all the links, which means that if you currently have a link in a site or in a document that refers to a document in the old system, then you have to completely rewrite the link itself because it's no longer valid. So that's quite an achievement to do that on so many fragmented links, actually. We did it in the available timeline with a lot of help from the customer. They're really dedicated and enthusiastic. It's quite a small organization, but a lot of complex content. So very happy with that. And if you want to know more about that, I'm sure we can connect you to them to hear their story firsthand. That was basically my part. So I will open up for questions.
Great, thank you, Rob. Yes, let's see if there are any questions. Let
me ask, would there be an interest to have a demo or a session on the actual classification of content? Because it's quite a new topic. There's not a lot of content to be found online on it, and we're happy to shed our light on that if you're interested.
Yeah, so auto classification with AI, right? And the rest, but I think that's mostly the new part of it.
Someone's typing. I can show you some classification stuff that has been built into to SharePoint, but I'm not sure if we can use the remaining time. Depends a bit on how many questions there are. But just for you to know that Microsoft has launched a simple version of that mechanism to use within SharePoint. However, it comes at a cost. And we were actually triggered by that mechanism to create our own version of it, which typically has a lower cost of running and achieving the same result. But there is a possibility to do it with Microsoft now. I would not use it for any migrated content because it's just too much. As an indication, it allows you to extract metadata from the full content of a file and store it in a SharePoint metadata field. in a column using an AI prompt. If you're a bit familiar with large language models type of AI, you know what a prompt is. So basically an instruction in natural language to do something with that content, and the system will figure it out. It actually works. It works really well. However, it does cost 5 cents per page of a file. So if you have 1 million files with on average 5 pages, you can do the math. It's pretty expensive to apply on migrated content. However, on newly ingested content, it could be a great solution, actually. So we would then migrate the old content for you and classify it in a cheaper way. And moving forward, you can revert to this mechanism to do the auto classification moving forward. So that's certainly a good scenario. And a number of our customers are actually exploring that as we speak because they're really interested in it and can finally do away with all that manual classification, which has been a drag for many, many years. But
yeah, so we have Christine saying it would be great to have a deeper dive into that. So I think it makes sense to do that. So we'll put it on the roadmap for webinars. That's a good idea. So then let's wrap it up. Thank you, Rob, again.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure, as always.
And thank you all who joined. Hope to see you in the next one. And for now, have a great day. Bye-bye.